All right, moving on to video 4, the Monroe Doctrine. We've mentioned a little bit about Monroe in relation to his roles with previous presidents, but at this point, James Monroe of Virginia, a disciple, if you want to call him, of both Madison and Jefferson, is now president. And this is what this video is going to be about, is something known as the Monroe Doctrine. I could talk about this for hours, but I won't. We'll try to get to the main points here. So, what led to this Monroe Doctrine? You have to realize that in the 18 teens and the early 1820s, a lot of countries in Latin America were revolting. You learned a little bit about this last year in world history. You have the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, and then Simon de Bolivar and all these others lead these revolutions in much other parts in the Americas. Now, some countries wanted Spain to sort of have a reconquest, if you will, of Latin America. And Russia was creeping around a little bit in our hemisphere. Maybe it wasn't our hemisphere at the time, but they had trading posts in places like San Francisco. Would it try to take over what's now, not what's snow, California? So in 1823, the Tsar of Russia made diplomatic inquiries. In other words, just talking things out here about how the US would respond to this renewed Europe colonization in the Western Hemisphere. So of both Spain, but hey, maybe even of themselves. Well, the US responded. And Monroe responded in his 7th annual message to Congress. Now, this was really the work of his Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams, who, as we know, later becomes president. But Monroe was the one who officially gave this. And what he said became known as the Monroe Doctrine. The U.S., he wrote, would view any attempt at European colonial expansion in the Western Hemisphere as an unfriendly act. So if you're going to try to colonize any other part of the Americas, we're going to take offense to that. And in such cases, the U.S. would be fully entitled to take such actions as dictated by prudence and as demanded by its sense of security. So they're basically saying, U.S. is here, you guys stay out. This is our side of the world. You have your side of the world to go work on. And there's a lot of effects with this. This did not have big consequences right away. Europe was not shaking in its boots going, oh no, they said stay away. They knew the US couldn't do much about it. We were still a pretty new country. Our Navy was not intimidating by any means. But Monroe was really confident about this. And it basically asserted American rights. And it said, we're a growing country. We have confidence in our capabilities. And we have confidence in our potential influence in international affairs. So it sort of made people start to take us maybe a little bit more seriously than they have in the past. Now, there was no real response from other nations. They knew the U.S. couldn't enforce it, but this became a key part of American foreign policy. And also, Britain was sort of on our side with this because Britain didn't want Spain expanding in the Americas.
How are you?
Hey, how you doing?
All right. I've heard all of your very sick.
Okay, my apologies. I had to talk to Mr. Cohen there for a second. Hopefully the sound picks up again. I know it's in it that one time. Anyway, what were we talking about? We were talking about Britain sort of working with this Monroe Doctrine simply because they didn't want other countries like Spain expanding in the Americas again. They wanted to be able to use South America for trade and their economic prosperity. So now that they were sort of on our good side, even though the War of 1812 wasn't that long ago, they supported the Monroe Doctrine. So if anything, other nations weren't fearing the U.S. and our Navy, but they were fearing the British Navy and how they might respond to this. So, little side note for you there. Okay. Other things I want you to think about. Some questions here. What reasons does Monroe give for denying further colonization by European powers in the Western Hemisphere? So why does he even do this? And here's some quotes from it. He's basically saying, we're more like those countries than you guys. In other words, you guys are monarchies, even though France was questionable at that time. France was still on the effects of Napoleon and stuff. We're democracy. And you're not going to make the people on this side of the world subjects. They're going to be citizens. So in other words, they're more like us. We should be the ones that deal with them. And that's, pretty much what those two quotes are about. What will the U.S. do if a European nation attempts to reclaim its former colonial possessions in the Western Hemisphere? And he says we should consider any attempt on their part to extend their system to any portion of this hemisphere as dangerous to our peace and safety. So what will the U.S. do? That's just sort of a lingering threat there. Okay, and is the Monroe Doctrine consistent with or a departure from George Washington's foreign policy advice in his farewell address? So Washington's talk about isolationism in his farewell address is probably the most famous part. This idea of don't be in foreign entanglements. In fact, the word foreign is used 15 times in his farewell address. And these are some of the lines from that. Foreign influence is one of the most baneful foes of Republican government. To have with other nations as little political connections as possible. To stay clear of permanent alliances. We warn against the mischiefs of foreign intrigue. So his address was mostly like, we're going to leave you alone. Right? That form of isolationism. We won't bother you. We're not going to get involved with your stuff, Europe. Now, Monroe's is now a little bit different. You leave us alone. You let us take care of this. So you see how they're both a little bit the same and a little bit different. Now, of course, we have a couple presidents between Washington and Monroe. One is Jefferson. And Jefferson didn't really talk about foreign entanglements, but he spoke about expanding our country. The idea that we're going to talk to a little bit more, known as manifest destiny, which we've seen with the Jeffersonian vision that we've covered before. So this painting is pretty famous. I'm sure you've seen it before. It's known as American Progress in 1872. This seemed to be, very beautiful and inspiring at the time. Now we would probably see this as ethnocentric, as racist, and all that sort of stuff. This is Lady Liberty holding a book. It's probably the Bible, right? You see Native Americans being chased out, the buffalo being chased out. What already exists in the Americas is dark, but she's bringing in the light as white European settlers come in. They bring in with them things like trains, like telegraph wires that are being set up, right? We need to expand this country. So keep in mind, Monroe Doctrine is given in 1823. And this is sort of like an early call for imperialism of the United States, to imperialize other nations, to imperialize that hemisphere. But we couldn't do that yet. We were trying to expand our own nation west. So it's not until 1898 that American imperialism begins, when we get the Spanish-American War, because we're expanding west on our continent, in our little chunk here. The U.S. Census doesn't say that the frontier ends till 1890. So then, of course, we turn to other parts of Latin America. So we later go to war against Mexico. We're going to talk about that this week. And we go to war against natives, and that enlarged the United States. But then when we sort of hit the shore, then expansion could go overseas. And now this area was sort of ours, in quotations, because of this, right? Roosevelt will add to this later with his Roosevelt corollary, that we're like the police of the Americas. It's more than just our area for other places to stay out of. So we'll talk about this a little bit. If you have questions, please let me know. It's really important to understand our ideas of expansion and our role in the world and this young part of our history. All right, thanks. See you guys soon.